Gene Clark was out with his scout troop near his rural Missouri town in May 1957 when the sky became pitch black in the late afternoon. As the wind howled and large hail fell from the sky, an F5 tornado was forming nearby. The troops sought shelter from the torrential rain in a nearby church, as the falling masonry blocked the front door, trapping them inside. As time passed, Gene became more and more agitated, overwhelmed with claustrophobic thoughts. In his absence, his mother had conducted a prayer vigil at their house, handing out rosary beads to his 12 siblings, who were told to pray for his safe return. In a single afternoon, the Ruskin Heights tornado left behind a trail of destruction over 71 miles long. One eyewitness recalled, 5 and up to 10 tentacles came down and joined together. Along the way, trees were uprooted, power lines fell, and cars were strewn like toys. Many buildings and homes were leveled. Martial law was declared, and the National Guard were brought in to aid in the rescue and cleanup operations. The final statistics read 44 dead and over 500 injured, but thousands more were traumatized. By the time the authorities arrived at the church, Gene was in a near catatonic state. Medics supplied him with a sedative until his father arrived to take him home. That night, Gene suffered hallucinations as he tried to sleep, reenacting the events of the day and uttering semi-coherent sentences. He would wake up screaming after that, his mother recalls. Night terrors were to remain a constant throughout much of his life. While living with Jim Dixon during the early days of the Byrds, he would awake in a sweat and tell of bizarre nightmares in which he was rolled up in a carpet filled with prickling tacks and broken glass. He acquired a lasting fear of tightly enclosed spaces, among others. Gene's early life might explain some of the fears he hid deep within that eventually rose to the surface. And later, as his fellow musicians met their demise in plane crashes, Gene battled his fear of flying, as well as his reluctance to the chaos of fame that led to the undermining of his own career and ultimately his life. Gene's story reminds us that even the strongest among us, those who appear to have figured it out, can find themselves gripped by the troubles of life when they least expect it. Sometimes it sneaks up on you after years of holding things together when we can no longer outrun the pressure. His is a tale of the troubles of life and how we respond or don't respond to those troubles. Let's look back at Gene Clark's incredible music contributions as he struggled with his fear of flying and fame that ultimately changed the course of his career. The skies haunted his story. Buddy Holly in 59, Otis Redding in 67, Jim Croce in 73, then Skinner, Ricky Nelson, and Stevie Ray. The fear that seemed irrational to everyone around him continued to supply Gene with evidence to fuel his fear, leading him to dark coping methods. He looked fearless, tall, brooding, and an all-American look. And while in the Byrds, he supplied the early hits such as I'll Feel a Whole Lot Better and 8 Miles High. By 21, Gene Clark was the Byrds' secret weapon, the dominant songwriter, the most sensitive voice, and the one making the most money, which led to tensions and jealousy within the Byrds. He speaks of writing one of the pioneering and most brilliant songs of the psychedelic era with Brian Jones.
It started with a conversation with Brian Jones in a hotel room when we were on the road with the Rolling Stones. And I started getting ideas from talking to Brian. And we were actually talking about William Burroughs. Now, what that has to do with 8 Miles High, I don't know, but he was a Burroughs fan, and so was I. And I just read a bunch of William Burroughs stuff, and I found out that Brian was real into William Burroughs. So we started talking about it, and all at once I got this idea, and I grabbed a net. We were eating dinner in the hotel room because we couldn't go out. There were like 500 kids outside. We could not go out to the hotel. And McGuinn came down and joined us for a while. And during the conversation, I got this idea, and I scribbled down a bunch of lyrics, and later on the bus, I found a melody for it, but I didn't have an arrangement, and I didn't have all the lyrics. So David and Roger got interested. They said, hey, that's good. And we finished the song together. Railway town, known for its sound.
In a tragic parallel, both Clark and Jones were gifted artists, undone in part by the very pain that gave their music a richness. Substances can help you forget your problems for a while, but your problems sure don't forget about you. During this period with the Byrds living in Laurel Canyon, their neighbors are the Mamas and the Papas. John Phillips discovers that his wife Michelle is having an affair with fellow bandmate Denny Daughtery. John and Denny move out of their Laurel Canyon home on Lookout Mountain, and Michelle begins dating Gene Clark. They continue to perform gigs while John and Michelle are broken up. Then one night at a show, Gene comes to see Michelle perform, and it's too much for John. He is seething with anger. After they are done performing, John chases Michelle outside in a fit of rage and fires her from the band as revenge for her betrayal.
I ran off the stage, out the back door and into my car. But John was hot on my heels, and he grabbed me and he said, "You are fired. You are fired." And I said, "I don't think you really have the legal right to do that, John." He said, "You wait and see."
Eventually, she gives in and begs him back to get her spot in the band, ending her relationship with Gene. In early 1966, Gene Clark sat on an airplane at the Los Angeles airport, clutching the armrests as if his life depended on it. The Byrds were boarding a flight to New York, another in a long line of press runs, television appearances, and a whirlwind promotional schedule. But this time, Gene was a mess. His face was pale, jaw clenched, his body was trembling. He was drenched in sweat. As his bandmates boarded the plane and witnessed this unfold, Gene shook his head. "I can't do it," he muttered. "I'm not staying on the plane. I have to get off." Gene stood up and looked at his bandmates one last time as he exited the plane, leaving them bewildered. While it wasn't the first time he felt that fear, it was the first time he let it stop him from continuing on, although it would turn out to be far from the last. But what led to Gene's full-blown panic attack that day? Was it an irrational fear, or was it rooted in something real? On multiple occasions, Gene refused to fly with the Byrds, leading Roger McGuinn to tell him, "If you can't fly, you can't be a bird." But the stress of his fears took control of him, not just in airplanes, but emotionally too. The fame felt like inescapable chaos every time he stepped off the plane, and each takeoff pulled at some invisible thread inside him. Maybe fear of death, maybe fear of losing control, like on that dark day back in Missouri. After management put McGuinn as lead singer on some of their biggest hits, along with Gene's songs being pushed aside to make room for Roger and David's songs, Gene began feeling isolated from the band, and in 1966, he left the Byrds. Chris Hillman noted years later in an interview, "At one time, he was the power in the Byrds. Not McGuinn, not Crosby. It was Gene who would burst through the stage curtain, banging on a tambourine, coming on like a young Prince Valiant. A hero, our savior. Few in the audience could take their eyes off his presence. He was the songwriter. He had the gift that none of the rest of us had developed yet. What deep inner part of his soul conjured up songs like Set You Free This Time, I'll Feel a Whole Lot Better, I'm Feeling Higher, 8 Miles High, so many great songs. We learned a lot of songwriting from him, and in the process, learned a little bit about ourselves." He briefly returned to Missouri before moving back to Los Angeles and spent a brief time as Gene Clark and the group. Columbia Records signed Clark as a solo artist, and in 1967, he released his first solo album, Gene Clark with the Gosden Brothers. The album was a unique mixture of pop, country, rock, and Baroque psychedelic tracks. The album featured Doug Dillard, Leon Russell, Jim Gordon, Glenn Campbell, former bandmates Chris Hillman and Michael Clark, as well as future Byrd Clarence White. It received favorable reviews and reinforced Clark's stature as a talented singer-songwriter, but unfortunately for Clark, it was released almost simultaneously with the Byrds' Younger Than Yesterday. That, along with being lost in the shuffle of all the great music of the time, it was a commercial failure. But with time, it gained appreciation. Tracks like Echoes and So You Say You Lost Your Baby are considered overlooked classics. Critics often now call the album a precursor to country rock, predating major releases like Sweetheart of the Rodeo by the Byrds. Clark was pioneering a sound that the rest of his peers hadn't caught up to yet.
You said, and the echoes in your head continue showing.
After David Crosby was fired from the Byrds in October '67, Gene Clark returned. During this brief period with the Byrds, he appeared with the band on the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour, performing the group's current single, Going Back. He also performed Mr. Spaceman with them. However, after only 3 weeks, Clark left the Byrds again, reportedly due to a panic attack just before a scheduled flight to perform with the band. Just weeks later, on December 10, 1967, on its final approach to Madison, Wisconsin, the private plane carrying soul music legend Otis Redding would crash into the frigid waters of a small lake 3 miles short of the runway, killing 7 of the 8 men aboard, including Redding. He recorded sitting on the dock of the bay just 3 days prior. It would be released the following month, becoming his #1 hit. The crash happened just 240 miles from where Buddy Holly, the Big Bopper, and Ritchie Valens crashed 8 years prior in 1959. While growing, air travel was still relatively uncommon to the average American in the 50s. The tragic event surely made an impression on Clark as he was coming of age at that time. For someone already haunted by the dangers of flying, the timing of the Redding tragedy likely reinforced Gene's belief that flying was a fatal gamble, not just an irrational fear. But his infamous fear of flying may have been a symptom of either what some of his family identified in hindsight as a family-shared bipolar condition, or at the very least anxiety attacks, self-medicating his unacknowledged condition with alcohol and drugs as he tried to wade through the pressures of the music industry. Publicist Derek Taylor remembers, "As for Gene, he would do anything. He would have a glass in one hand and a pill in another. The moodiness and excessive introspection were only exasperated." Clark was already a pioneer of folk rock with the Byrds when in 1968 he teamed up with fierce banjo picker Doug Dillard to form Dillard and Clark. The two hit upon a new formula that combined traditional bluegrass instrumentation and rock to create a new flavor of country rock, musically and harmonically rooted in the Blue Ridge Mountains. The first album, The Fantastic Expedition of Dillard and Clark, was hailed by critics and musicians as a unique masterpiece at the intersection of country rock and Americana. Bernie Leadon co-wrote many of the songs and also performed on the album. Songs like Train Leaves Here This Morning showcases Gene Clark's gift for introspective storytelling. Co-written with Bernie Leadon, the song blends folk, country, and rock with a sense of quiet resignation. The song would later be covered by the Eagles on their debut album in 1972.
I lost 10 points just for being in the right place at exactly the...
Due to Clark's refusal to tour, a short series of shows at the Troubadour in LA was the only promotion for the album, and as a result, it too was a commercial failure. The collaboration with Dillard rejuvenated Clark's creativity, but this time period contributed to his growing drinking problem. Dillard and Clark disintegrated in 1969.
Nobody ever loved me like she does me. Ooh, she does me.
With the royalties from his Byrds songs, along with the Turtles cover of his song You Showed Me, he moved to Northern California with his wife and started a family in 1970. In 1971 came his second solo album, White Light, an intimate, poetic, and mostly acoustic work supplemented by Jesse Ed Davis's slide guitar. The album contained many introspective tracks, and For a Spanish Guitar, which Bob Dylan hailed as one of the greatest songs ever written.
Pulsate from my soul through my brain in a Spanish guitar.
All of the material was written by Clark, with the exception of Dylan and Richard Manuel's Tears of Rage. Launched to considerable critical acclaim, the album once again failed to gain commercial success. Once more, the modest promotion and Clark's refusal to undertake promotional touring adversely affected sales. On September 20th, 1973, singer-songwriter Jim Croce was killed in a plane crash just hours after performing a concert at Northwestern State University in Louisiana. The small chartered plane took off in foggy conditions and crashed into a tree at the end of the runway, killing all 6 people on board. He was just 30 years old and at the peak of his career. With hits like Bad Bad Leroy Brown and Time in a Bottle, his death came the day before the release of his next single, I Got a Name, which went on to become one of his most iconic songs. In 1974, Gene Clark joined Asylum Records, where he was given creative freedom. The label was home to the most prominent artists of the singer-songwriter movement. The ensuing album, No Other, fused elements of country rock, folk, gospel, soul, and choral music with poetic, mystical lyrics. The whole album was written when I had a house overlooking the Pacific Ocean in Northern California. I would just sit in the living room and with a huge bay window, stare out at the ocean for hours at a time. I would have a pen and a paper there and a guitar or piano, and pretty soon a thought would come and I'd write it down or put it on tape.
Have you seen a changing river? Now they wait.
Raised in a large devout Catholic family, Clark sang in the church choir and was steeped in religious imagery and traditional values from an early age. Though he drifted from organized religion as an adult, the emotional weight of his early faith often resurfaced in his songwriting, taking on the big questions of life. Songs like Some Misunderstanding and Strength of Strings feel almost like modern hymns, a residue of his early life that gave his work a unique emotional depth.
We all have soul.
Clark told Zigzag in 1977 that he was strongly influenced by Stevie Wonder's 1973 album Inner Visions and the Rolling Stones' 1973 album Goat's Head Soup. He said, "When I was writing No Other, I concentrated on those albums a lot and was very inspired by the direction of them, which is ironic because Inner Visions is a very climbing spiritual thing, while Goat's Head Soup has connotations of the lower forces as well. But somehow the joining of the two gave me a place to go with No Other, and I wanted it to go in a powerful direction." Released in September 1974, it was largely ignored and was a commercial failure. The studio time and costs were seen as excessive. Asylum Records did not promote the album and by '76 had deleted it from their catalog. Clark never recovered from the failure of the album. According to Gene's brother David, Gene put everything into that. Everything. Heart, soul, money, everything he had poured into that thing because it was going to be his reclamation. And when they killed it, it killed him.
When I'm feeling high or I'm feeling low.
No Other slowly gained recognition as a lost masterpiece. Once dismissed, the album is now celebrated for its rich production, emotional depth, and genre-blending vision. Musicians and critics alike have praised its bold fusion of folk, rock, gospel, and psychedelia, with many calling it one of the most underrated albums of the 1970s. A testament to Clark's artistry and a powerful reminder of how ahead of his time he truly was. After No Other, Gene entered a difficult chapter of his career. At the time, its poor reception deeply affected him, both financially and emotionally. On October 20th, 1977, a chartered plane carrying Lynyrd Skynyrd crashed in a wooded area, killing lead singer Ronnie Van Zant, guitarist Steve Gaines, and a backing singer, and 3 other passengers. The band was en route to Baton Rouge, Louisiana, when the plane ran out of fuel and attempted an emergency landing. It clipped trees and broke apart, leaving the remaining band members and crew seriously injured. The crash came just 3 days after the release of their album Street Survivors, whose cover hauntingly showed the band surrounded by flames. The tragedy marked the end of the original Skynyrd lineup and became one of rock's most devastating moments, cementing the group's legacy in Southern rock history. In the late 1970s, Clark continued recording, releasing the more stripped-down 2 sides to every story in 1977. His wife left him and moved to Hawaii with their sons, knowing that Clark would not follow her due to his fear of flying. The emotional fallout from his divorce is reflected in the album's title and several of Clark's compositions. He finally put his fear of flying on hold to mount an international tour to promote it.
Do you know who I am?
He also reunited with the original Byrds lineup that same year, but the resulting self-titled reunion album was critically panned and failed to reignite his momentum. As the years went on, Clark's struggles with substance abuse, mental health, and physical ailments increasingly interfered with his ability to perform and record consistently. Despite these setbacks, he remained creatively active. In the early 80s, he collaborated with Carla Olson on the well-regarded So Rebellious a Lover in '87, which received critical praise and brought renewed, if modest, attention to his work. The album showed Clark still capable of songwriting brilliance, even as his health deteriorated.
Crank her over once again.
On December 31st, 1985, Ricky Nelson's chartered airplane caught fire mid-flight and crash-landed near DeKalb, Texas. Nelson and 6 members of his band were killed. Only the pilots survived. The group was en route to a New Year's Eve concert in Dallas. Then 5 years later, on August 27, 1990, blues guitarist Stevie Ray Vaughan was killed in a helicopter crash shortly after performing at a concert in Alpine Valley, Wisconsin. The helicopter, flying in dense fog, slammed into a hillside, killing Vaughan and 4 others instantly, including 3 members of Eric Clapton's tour crew. Both tragedies sent shockwaves through the music world and marked the untimely end of 2 gifted artists at very different stages of their careers. By the early 1990s, Gene Clark's battles had taken a toll. He suffered from ulcers, addiction issues, and underlying mental health challenges, all of which complicated a planned solo comeback. In January 1991, Gene Clark reunited with the original Byrds for their induction into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. It was a rare and poignant moment. The founding members, long estranged and musically scattered, stood together once more to accept recognition for their groundbreaking contributions to rock music. The group performed a short set, including Mr. Tambourine Man. Clark's presence at the ceremony offered a final public acknowledgement of his role in shaping the Byrds' sound and influence. It was one of his last major appearances before his untimely death just 4 months later. Gene Clark died on May 24, 1991, at the age of 46, related to a bleeding ulcer from years of a substance habit. Though he died relatively young and underappreciated by the mainstream, his posthumous legacy has only grown, with no other and his broader catalog now celebrated for their haunting beauty, innovation, and emotional depth. He was buried at St. Andrew Catholic Cemetery in Tipton, Missouri, beneath an epitaph that read, "No Other." In the quiet rooms where he recorded, Gene's voice never trembled. He layered harmonies in the songs he wrote about the trains and planes that rolled through his modest upbringing, along with lost love. I Can't Fly became more than a literal fear. It became a wall between him and the life he briefly had that slipped away. Years later, fans have discovered the treasure buried beneath the surface, the singer who didn't fly, but soared every time he sang. In the end, Gene Clark left behind a body of work filled with breathtaking honesty, songs that often reflected how misunderstood he felt. He was a man who carried the weight of the world deep within, quietly, whose internal storms never quite cleared, even when his creative genius shined through.
Far above the troubled sky.
Thank you for watching. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Links to the book, albums, and playlists will be in the description. And a big thank you to those who joined or bought me a cup of coffee. I really appreciate all your support. Cheers!